Back in my film photography days, I used this 70 to 210 zoom lens all the time. And when I moved to a DSLR system, I knew I wanted an autofocus lens with a similar focal length. I bought the Canon 70-200 f4L. It was a lens I was really happy with, but I sold it, which is quite unusual for me because I normally only sell lenses I'm not happy with. The reason I sold it was because on an APS-C body, it had an equivalent focal length of 320mm, and it wasn't always easy to handhold. There wasn't always enough light to get the high shutter speeds you need, and I didn't want to bump up the ISO too much because of the loss in detail. When Canon announced an IS version of the lens, I knew I had to have one, so I sold my non-IS one and bought this. And I've had it ever since December 2006. When I used DSLRs, I used it quite a lot, but since I moved to an EOS M system, I've hardly used it, and I'll explain why later in the video. But first of all, let's take a bit of a closer look. It's 172mm long, and the maximum diameter is 76mm. The weight is 760 grams, and the front filter diameter is 67mm. The closest focusing distance is 1.2 meters, and the minimum aperture is f32. Inside, there's a circular aperture with 8 diaphragm blades, and in some of the sample images later, we'll take a look at the bokeh qualities. There are 20 lens elements in 15 groups, and because it's an L lens, some of the lens elements are fluorite and some are ultra low dispersion, UD. And for environmental reasons, all of the lens elements are lead free. On the outside there's a focus distance scale, a switch for autofocus distance. Depending how close your subject is, choose either 1.2 meters to infinity or 3 meters to infinity. You can switch between autofocus and manual focus. You can turn the stabilizer on or off, and there's also a stabilizer mode. Mode 1 is for normal photography and mode 2 is for panning. Apparently with the first generation of Canon IS lenses, if you panned, the lens mistook that for camera shake and compensated accordingly, and you don't want it to do that when you're panning. The lens has third generation 4-stop image stabilization. And one thing I need to mention is that the IS is quite noisy. With my other IS lenses, they're virtually silent, but this one makes a loud whirring sound when the IS is running. The thing is not to worry. I've seen forums where lots of people complain about this, and it seems that every lens is noisy, and it's not something you need to worry about. It's just normal. Here's an image with the IS on, 30th of a second at 200mm, and it looks fairly sharp. I did try to use slower shutter speeds, but I didn't have any success getting a sharp image. Interestingly, with my EFM 55 to 200, I can get sharp images with lower shutter speeds. I don't think it's because the IS in that lens is any better. I just think it's because the EFM 55 to 200 is very light, very small, and it's a lot easier to handhold. It feels much lighter than this lens. What I've decided to do in this review is to show you some real images I've taken over the years with this lens. What I'm not going to do is show you pictures of lens charts and brick walls and pixel peep in the corners at maximum aperture, because that's just not how we use cameras and lenses in real life. I have done that with a few lens reviews, but to be honest, I'm not really happy about doing it. I much prefer a real life view of the lens. I took this lens on a trip I made to Mae Sot on the Thailand-Burma border. A lot of Burmese float across the river on big inner tubes and work in factories in Thailand. And I quite enjoy this style of photojournalistic photography. And this lens is really good for that because it's got good reach, good quality, and it's not too big or intrusive. I also quite enjoy candid portraiture. And when you've got a lens with quite a lot of reach and you can get a good working distance between you and the subject, the people don't feel as self-conscious, and I find that portraits look a lot more natural. Even though life is quite tough for the Burmese staying in the refugee camps in Thailand, it must still be better than the lives they have back in Burma. Here's another candid portrait, and this one shows the bokeh qualities of the lens, which is quite good most of the time. The only thing I don't like is that if there are any bright lights in the background, these tend to get a bit blown out and become a bit distracting. This image demonstrates what I mean. This lens also works very well with the 1.4 times extender. You lose a stop of light, but there's very little, if any, degradation in image quality. Here's another image taken with the 1.4 extender. There's lots of details in the image. The only problem is it tends to highlight those bright lights in the background. I've also used this lens at concerts. Here's Lana Cummins from Chiang Mai singing with Todd Lavelle. But because the maximum aperture is only f4, I did need to use a flash. Regarding wildlife, it's fine for trips to the zoo and big animals, but not really long enough for birds. I've done some bird photography with this lens, and it's not really long enough. Ideally, you want 400mm, not 200. Here's another shot from Mausot, and I really like this lens for portraits because of the working distance and the fact that people don't feel self-conscious when you're taking their photo. In this shot we can see quite a lot of detail, and if there are no bright lights in the background, the bokeh actually looks quite good. It's only if you do get lights that they tend to get a bit blown out and become distracting. Here's another candid portrait. This time it's from the Loei Krathong Festival, which happens every November in Thailand. In this image I used f8, but looking at it now I think I should have opened up the aperture to its maximum to blur the figures in the background and put more focus on the Buddha in the foreground. I've always enjoyed this type of photography. When I used to go to weddings in the UK, everyone was taking photos of the bride and groom. I used to look around the guests and take photos of people who weren't expecting to have their photo taken. So I think they make for much more interesting photos. And to do that, you need quite a long lens. And this lens at 200mm, which is 320 on a crop sensor camera, is ideal. When I have to summarize a lens, I always ask myself the question, would I buy this lens again now? And with this lens, the answer is no. There are a few reasons for that. Firstly, Canon updated this lens a few years ago. There's now a Mark II version of the f4L-IS, and by all accounts Canon did a fantastic job, and it's supposed to be a much better lens than this one. Secondly, this one was released in 2006, and since then there have been some big improvements with lens technology, and there are now several lenses around that are just as good optically as this one, but a fraction of the price. The EFM 55-200 I own is a very good lens, although it's quite a bit slower than this lens. I've also heard very good reports about the EFS 55-250, and if you're a full frame shooter, the latest 70-300 lens is supposed to be very good. The reason I've used this lens so little since moving to EOS M is firstly because the lens is a little bit big for the EOS M format, and secondly because the EFM 55-200 does such a great job. I've really enjoyed owning and using this lens over the years, but if I was in the market now for a zoom lens of a similar focal length, I think I'll buy something else. But that doesn't make it a bad lens, and if you can find a good used one for a good price, it will still be a very good buy. I hope that's been useful, and I hope I haven't upset anyone by not including images of test charts and brick walls, but in this case I really didn't think that was the right thing to do. I'll be doing some more videos soon, so please subscribe so you'll be notified when they're ready, and thanks for watching.